what we are allowed in the promotional videos that we take to accompany the camp courses that were made out of small and individualized exoskeletons that you could have said, hey, this adventurer in a foreign land won't like any waffles that have too much sugar-based chemicals alongside their parfait. And in the end game, when there's everybody assembled and they're saying, okay, I died in the 50s and I died when everybody legalized marijuana, and then there's 40 people over here who don't have enough metal in their kitchen to make sea anemones. And you gather them all together and they say, this is the time that we have trumpeted and emblazoned upon our crests since time immemorial. And they say, I think that we have to have figureheads, and the figureheads must line the palisades, and the palisades must be made from utensils that were spat out of babies' mouths when they didn't have enough encephalopathy on their bottoms. And you take these things and you make them all into a kind of conundrum that will never be impermeable to the vicissitudes of denigration. And everybody says, I have a lot of Jell-O in my knickers. And other people say, oh, that's not enough Jell-O in your knickers. And when you take these things and when you make them into individualized receptacles for scallops that have been filled with the trifles of mundanity, and these things have like little pieces, like you tear them into confetti-sized disseminations, and on each little piece of confetti you could write the Constitution of the United States of America if you had a whistle-shaped knickerbocker that had the kinds of permutations that have to be incredibly sinewy if you're going to make them out of meat. And you take that meat and you chew it up, and then you have gristle in your fingertips, and you try to pick that kind of thing out. You need a dog to come up and really lick your fingertips to get the gristle out. And in that dog's memory, when it would recount the days of its whelping to any people that could therapize a dog, I mean, you'd have to have a kind of electrode-based mini-muffin, and it would take all of the, receptacles of its brain, and you would have to have a receptacle mapping, right? Because the parts of a dog's brain that understand how to weed the 3D minuets, those parts aren't the same minuet 3D receptacles that happen in our brain, and you have to counter stage it, right? Because if you say, oh, this mighty field of grass is where we will mount our production of Clytemnestra, and then the other people say, no, we have to have a kind of rocky terrain so that people can crouch and pounce, and people can declaim from yon pointy promontory, and other people say, no, when you make the declamation, it has to be from deep within a pit of anguish. And what kind of production would that be, right? Where you dig a deep pit and people walk over here and they look down the pit and they see one part of the performance, and then they walk over to the other pit and they gaze down that pit and they see the other performance. And what kind of dialogue can happen between two people in two different pits? And isn't that the modern situation to a T? We're all in our little pits and we're all declaiming, and everybody who tries to have a conversation has to wander from one pit to the other and gaze down into the well before they can even see the visage from which the sounds emanate. And in these things, if you map these onto the memory of a dog and you say to the dog, what did it taste like when you licked the gristle from my fingertips? And it says, well, I don't think that I can transpose this performance space from a rocky, protuberating incendulum to some other kind of, grassy laden or maybe pit-filled amphitheater. And then we say, what was the performance anyway? Because to string together the various exclamations that you hear coming from holes, or even if you're actually sitting in a field of rocky promontories and you feel, they're going to be tiny mini promontories that are going to poke you in the butt. And if you have Jell-O in your knickers, it's all just going to leak out over the promontories, and you're going to have Jell-O covered promontories that have leaked out of your knickers, and you're going to say, oh, I miss my dear old Agatha, who took the time to make tiny little there were simulated lollipops that came from freezing grist, and the ovens that were full of the you have to break bake grist before you freeze it, of course. And so you have an oven full of baking tiny little mini lollipops made out of grist. And you also have a freezer full of freezing, because after this bake, you freeze them, and then you have a nice little grist lollipop. And if this is what you want from a house worker, you're going to have to advertise in the kinds of places where people who don't find any quality of life in spendthriftery never read and never also place advertisements, because to look upon the wider social acceptance of the things that you lick before you put them on your foreknuckle, the way that anybody has regurgitative misanthropy has to be something that you've eaten before you re-eat it, because you can't regurgitate something you haven't gurgitated. And the people that like to wallow on their hindquarters, and the people who crouch, and there are different ways of crouching, right? You can crouch with the hindquarters sort of touching the ground, or you can crouch in a way that really, really strains your calves. And if you are a calf strainer, then what you take to be the more comfortable fitting garment is not like the things that a tailor would recommend to a reprobate. And the way that we take to our prisons and we say, well, who wants a high hem and who wants a short-slitted waist seam? Well, we take to these people where we say, hey, you have broken the boundaries that we set around society, and so how do you want your cuffs? Those people, they come all the way to a distant land, and or from a distant land, and the assembling. I mean, this is what we return to again and again, is that you must assemble the various trigetaries, and the people that come from these tribes, they have to be found in a way that doesn't require perceptivity, because if you have to form a collection based upon your own discrimination, the collection will therefore be bounded by your own ability to select for a quality that can't necessarily be perceived directly. And so you're going to say, oh, I want this many people who are capable of encephalizing a referendum, and those people will, possibly project that quality and possibly not. And if you ask them, or if, let's say you had a device that you could plug into a forehead the same way you take a little, the ends of the, little pointy, prongy things that you put into a corn when you're going to eat it. Let's say you could put one of those into somebody's forehead, and it had a little lens on the other end, and it would project what their assumptions were related to the dirges that you can hear in the early morning if you don't like math. And those people would say, well, they wouldn't say it because you wouldn't be able to hear it in your ears. You would have to hear it in your refinanced net worth. And those things that are detectable through a spreadsheet that shows assets and balances, that kind of Golgi apparatus is really the most fulfilling thing to disintegrate in your house. So we're all standing around and we've drawn up our, records of fiscal impropriety, and then we've disintegrated them in the midst of our house, and we say, I never remember having had mutton chops that girthful. And the thicket of mutton chophood through which some people must climb if they want to caress a loved one really is a testament to the quality of life that you have if your minister has rickets. And thumbnails that don't show the lack of respect that people have for beehives in winter, those thumbnail sketches are the kind of sort of records that police like when they're prosecuting the criminals of milk. And the corporendum, which we can call the incorporated referendum, and the corporendum becomes, well, you can say there's an extended corpus, right, that isn't just the people who can say we are amongst, but are also the people who can say we are among. Thank you for listening. Comments welcome.